The modern day priorities of college football means the Rose Bowl is third or fourth on the list of priorities for Ohio State football right now, but we will talk about that matchup against Utah. We got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports to break down the Buckeyes. Hey, Pat.
Hey, how you doing today?
I'm good. So you just had a conversation with somebody who's fairly well known around the state of Ohio and is fairly acclaimed and has a trip to New York City this weekend.
Yeah, CJ Stroud spoke with the media on Wednesday ahead of, obviously, the Heisman trip this weekend. A finalist, one of four finalists. He's excited. He said he's never been to New York City. The closest he ever has come was when the Buckeyes went to Rutgers in New Jersey. So a little bit different than the big city lights. But he's excited to do that. You know, a kid that grew up watching college football. He even admitted he was a little bit more of a basketball fan, but always thought about this Heisman Trophy. Obviously, that's a huge thing if you are any sort of college football fan, high school football player. And so the opportunity to do that is great. He said he didn't even really think about that, even though, you know, he was stepping in to a line of not just Dwayne Haskins and Justin Fields, but I mean, you go back to Braxton Miller. I think he finished fifth or something one of his years at Ohio State. JT Barrett was in the running 1 year or two. So, you know, it's quite the line of Ohio State quarterbacks that have been starters to be involved in at least the Heisman conversation. Obviously, the last three guys now have all been finalists. So, you know, he said that wasn't something that really came up in recruiting, but as this year progressed, he began to think it was more of a possibility. He said wide receivers Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba did give him, kind of pumped him up a bit throughout the season about how he was doing and his stats, and brought up the Heisman stuff. And, you know, he said at one point, he couldn't remember exactly when, but at one point towards the end of the year, he started to feel like, okay, this is a real possibility. And obviously he finished pretty strong. The Buckeyes lose against Michigan. I think the consensus is that Bryce Young from Alabama is going to win it. I think if CJ Stroud had beaten Michigan, because his numbers were still good in that game, and had the opportunity to showcase himself in the Big Ten championship game, it would be, a closer odds wise, at least. We'll see what the voting turns out to be. But, you know, just the honor to be there as a redshirt freshman, I think, is a big deal. And obviously he can build on this for at least one more year with Ohio State.
Yeah. When I think Heisman Trophy and what the secret formula is, or maybe not so secret, would be statistics, winning, and then having those plays or those moments that are either just so jaw-dropping from an athletic standpoint or are key to winning a big game. You put those three together, and it typically adds up to a Heisman Trophy. He's had an amazing season. Does he have an idea of what this means within the legacy of Ohio State football, that there are past Heisman Trophy winners, and that the number, I believe, I haven't looked this up in a long time, I believe Ohio State's tied with USC and maybe somebody else. Notre Dame.
Yeah, and 7 winners.
He could be the tiebreaker.
I am sure that he is aware of it to some degree. I don't know if he knows that they're tied with USC and Notre Dame, but it's hard to walk through the halls of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center and not see, you know, tons of great players, but specifically the Heisman Trophy winners. There's a whole wall, I believe, with those guys on there. So he's definitely aware of where Ohio State kind of stands in the big picture of things and what this means. I think only 13 or 14 Heisman Trophy finalists for Ohio State. So, you know, it's despite the fact that it's recently been a trend to have these quarterbacks there, it's not something that happens every day. Justin Fields, even after going 2 years ago, didn't make it last year to New York City. Now, that probably had a bigger deal to do with the fact that they only played 6 games as opposed to the normal schedule. If he plays the 12-13, I imagine he's back in New York City. But again, it's not something that happens every day, despite what we've recently seen. And you've got to earn it. And he certainly did. I don't think there was any question that he was going to go. I booked my flight to New York City to cover it 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think after the Michigan State game. So it was pretty clear that he's at least one of the 4, and we'll see where he finishes in the voting.
We've got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. He is covering the Heisman Trophy presentation this weekend. Just got done talking to CJ Stroud. Please check out his work there at Bucknuts 247. All right. maybe even more important toward Ohio State's future in 2022, of course, would be a new defensive coordinator has been named, Jim Knowles of Oklahoma State. Folks, if you want to go through the metrics of Oklahoma State defense in 2021, if you're not aware, and much of it came to the national prominence the last couple of weeks of the season when they beat Oklahoma in Bedlam, went to the Big 12 championship game, and despite a loss, still held Baylor down to only 21 points and not much on offense. So he certainly did the job at his last stop.
Certainly, and frankly, he's done a good job everywhere he's been. I mean, he was the head coach at his alma mater at Cornell. He was a defensive coordinator at Duke, was in the SEC with Ole Miss for a short period of time. The biggest numbers that jump off the page to you are what happened this past year at Oklahoma State. 3rd in total defense, 7th in scoring defense. They were top 10 nationally in sacks, tackles for a loss, and 3rd down defense. All things that Ohio State fans are very familiar with this Buckeye team not doing a great job of this past season, and even going back to last season. So it's an interesting situation. He's not going to take over the defensive coordinator role until January 2nd, after the bowl games are all done. That means that the current Ohio State coaching staff should remain intact through the early signing period that starts on December 15th, and obviously the Rose Bowl game. So we won't see too much difference in the Rose Bowl, but he will begin to get to work with these guys. I think his defense makes a lot of sense for Ohio State. Ryan Day went out and found somebody who knows what he's doing defensively, but also still kind of fits in the general framework of Ohio State's defense, a 4-2-5 scheme. Can play with some guys down the box, bring some exotic blitzes. One of the things I found when doing some research was he has a position that they've called the jack linebacker, which is like a stand-up defensive end linebacker. But he really moves him around, that player around quite a bit, which allows the other linebackers to do some different things. So I think that'll be very interesting, especially when you get into some of these Big Ten games you saw against Michigan, how easily they were able to run. Now you have that position where you can kind of change out what you need to do in order to get the best looks against the offense you're facing. Who that'll be, who will play that, which players will play that position for Ohio State, we'll find out down the line. But he's used something similar to Ohio State's bullet position. They have a player similar to what Ronnie Hickman did this year in Malcolm Rodriguez, led the team in tackles, was a converted safety to linebacker. So similar situation there. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's good that Ryan Day got this done when he did, announcing it December 7th. That means there doesn't need to be a ton of questions about what you're going to do with the defense, what you're going to do with the defense. There'll still be questions about Jim Knowles. There'll be questions about the staff, I imagine, but it lessens some of that to some degree. So a real good step. I really like what I've learned about him, and I think it's going to be a good fit with the Buckeyes, assuming he's able to just run the defense. Ryan Day can run the offense, and obviously Ryan Day's still the head coach, but let the guy who knows defense handle things and make the final decisions on that side of the ball.
Ohio State fans, if you're skeptical about competition maybe in the Big 12, let's consider this. We're at a time of the year where obviously with non-conference matchups all over the place in bowl games, we're trying to get a read on how good teams are and how good the competition was. Yeah, the Big 10 is, I think by most estimations, better than the Big 12, but the Big 12, solid conference, good offense. Oklahoma State, really a quarterback, wide receiver driven school under Mike Gundy. And then Jim Knowles gets there. And actually, they won on defense the last couple of years. And specifically, as Pat points out this year, when you look at a defense, 7th in the nation in points against. Ohio State was 25th against the run, number 5 in the nation. Number 5, if you look at yards per play, rushing the football, yards per play total, only number 4 in the country. Ohio State was 38th. Total defense, number 3. Ohio State 50th. Just across the board, they were just not a flash in the pan this year either. They've been a top-notch defense for the last few years. So Jim Knowles certainly has delivered.
Yeah, and they've gotten better each year, which I think is important. And a lot of what I was learning about him last night was, this past year's defense was a veteran group who kind of grew up under him these last 3-4 years. And so it'll take some time to install everything he wants to do at Ohio State. But let's keep in mind, he's working with mostly 3, some 4-star kids at Oklahoma State. And that's not a shot at the Cowboys. It's just a different program, not on the same level recruiting wise. At Ohio State, he's going to have the best of the best at these positions. He'll also have an offense, as you mentioned. Oklahoma State's offense hasn't been as prolific as it had in the past. He'll have an offense that under Ryan Day and CJ Stroud, and yes, they'll lose some receivers and things like that, but an offense that keeps the ball, that will not require them to get a stop almost every time, things like that, that will make some of that easier, give them more time on the sideline. So I think all in all, it just makes a lot of sense to bring in a guy like this. And the Big 12 is known for their offense, right? That's what these teams, Oklahoma, Texas, when Texas is right, all of these teams have been known for high-powered offenses, high-flying offenses, and they were able to shut a lot of those offenses down this year. The Big Ten, obviously very different, especially as the weather gets colder and things like that. But you've got a guy who's kind of seen it all at different spots that he's been in. So, again, I think it's a good hire.
Yeah, it seems like an airtight home run hire. We shall see. Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports, breaking down the Buckeyes. And I mentioned off the top the Rose Bowl, which would be front and center. And in past iterations of the college football playoff and postseason format, of course, was the prize for the Big Ten and Ohio State fans. And now we're looking at a new defensive coordinator, CJ Stroud, in the Heisman race. National Signing Day is a week away. Oh, yeah. The Rose Bowl's coming up in a few weeks. It's a matchup against Utah, not necessarily, and not taking anything away from Utah whatsoever, but not a glamorous name to be facing. That they make their first appearance as a Pac-12 champion. Your initial thoughts about the Rose Bowl?
The most interesting thing to me is going to be Ohio State's motivation. As you mentioned at the beginning of this, today's day and age, program like Ohio State, you want to be in the Big Ten championship game, you want to win that, you want to go to the college football playoff. Ohio State obviously didn't do that this year. Instead, they had to watch Michigan do it. So what is Ohio State's motivation in this game? Well, I think there's a couple things. We'll see how many guys end up opting out. I get a sense that there will be some, but not a huge number. Guys that are ready to go on the NFL. So I think that provides opportunities for some younger guys to step in and kind of get a leg up on next year, which is part of it. But I also think this team doesn't want to have the memory of that Michigan loss followed by another loss in a Rose Bowl where they just don't show up to be kind of the defining legacy of this team. Yes, everyone's going to remember that Michigan finally got one over on Ohio State, and that we'll see what the Wolverines do. Obviously, they already won a Big Ten title. But if Ohio State can go into the Rose Bowl and beat what is generally conceived to be a pretty good Utah team, I think that lessens some of the poor memories of this season. And obviously there were a lot of good things the Buckeyes did. Now, if they go into that game and like some of the other teams, we've seen it from Alabama in the past, I'm sure there's other ones where they just lay an egg and roll over, and Utah's motivation of a first Rose Bowl and all this ends up, kind of being what people think of the Buckeyes. I think that would be a disappointment for everyone involved. Now, CJ Stroud talked when we spoke to him on Wednesday about being a kid from California and what this had meant to him. Now, Ohio State only has a few of those guys, Chris Olave being another primary one. But I do think that there is something about the Rose Bowl, especially as we get closer to it. The Buckeyes haven't really started practice. The coaches have been out recruiting thus far. It's been a lot of conditioning. I think as they get closer to it, I think there will be more and more excitement. It's definitely not what they wanted, but finishing the year on the right note, sending the seniors out in a positive manner, I think that matters to a lot of these guys. I know it matters to the coaching staff. And if the Rose Bowl is your consolation prize, it's a pretty good one. For people that have been there, they know an experience it is, everything around the game. And Ohio State doesn't go to the Rose Bowl as often as they might have, being as dominant as they've been. If you go back, there's 2000, I think it was 2009 when they played Oregon. Then it was 2018, Urban Meyer's last game against Washington, and now this game. So that's quite a bit of time. I don't even remember what was the last Rose Bowl before that 2009 game, but because of BCS championship games and the rotation there, they just missed out on a lot of it. So there's still definitely an interesting and fun opportunity here. It's not what they wanted, but I still think there's something to play for.
I don't think they played in a Rose Bowl before 2009, going back to the 1996 season against Arizona State.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it was the mid 90s because, throughout the 2000s under Jim Tressel, they weren't there until 2009. There were some years where they would have gone, but the Rose Bowl was the BCS national championship game. So yeah, it hasn't been something that's come around as much as you would think for a program that's been as dominant as Ohio State. And I do think especially kids that grew up in Ohio, I think they probably, or in the Big Ten kind of sphere, know about that. Even the kids that aren't California kids, but maybe Pac-12 area kids, understand the legacy of the Rose Bowl to some degree. It's definitely not what it used to be in terms of the granddaddy of them all. But, I still think once you get out there and kind of get into that, there's certainly the drive to win a game like that.
And if you take out the playoff games, it is still the most watched of the
Sure.
bowl games. So it will be more watched than any other bowl game, most likely than the 3 playoff games. Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports, breaking down Ohio State football for us. And Pat, we appreciate you stopping by as always, and hope to catch up with you soon, and maybe another matchup video with Utah and Ohio State.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.